The hall of the alien fortress was filled with cold light, strange symbols glowing on the walls, and shadows moving across the high ceiling. Soldiers stood in a circle, their sharp weapons pointed toward the center where a single human man was pushed to his knees. He looked weak, covered in dirt and blood, his simple clothes torn. His hands were tied with glowing chains. And every alien in the room laughed at him. To them he was nothing, just a fragile creature from a dying world. At the far end of the hall, the doors opened with a heavy sound. The commander walked in. She was tall, strong, and beautiful in a dangerous way. Her armor shimmered with silver and black, and her eyes were like burning fire. Everyone stepped aside when she moved, because no one dared to stand in her way. The human lifted his head slowly. His face was bruised, but his eyes held no fear. He looked at her as if he already knew something. They didn't. That alone made the aliens whisper among themselves. The commander stepped forward and stood before him. She raised her hand and, without hesitation, slapped him across the face. The sound echoed in the hall. The soldiers laughed louder, calling him weak, calling him useless. "That is for being human," she said, her voice sharp like steel. But the man did not lower his gaze. Instead, he smiled, a small, broken smile, but enough to silence the laughter around him. The commander frowned, not used to such a reaction. Most prisoners cried or begged, but this one, he only smiled. "Why? Do you smile?" she demanded. Her voice echoed across the walls. He tilted his head and answered softly, "Because you don't understand what it means to be human." The hall grew quiet. The aliens shifted uncomfortably. They were not used to such defiance, especially from a prisoner. The commander's eyes narrowed. She felt something strange stir inside her chest. He continued, his voice steady. "You think weakness is a curse, but weakness teaches us to fight differently, to survive where others fall. That is what makes us dangerous." The soldiers sneered. One of them stepped forward and pushed him hard, but still the man did not fall. He straightened his back, even with chains on his wrists. He looked at the commander again, as if challenging her with only his eyes. The commander stepped closer. Towering over him, she studied his face carefully, his wounds, his broken body, yet there was something inside him that was unbroken. She could feel it, and it unsettled her. "You speak boldly for someone at my mercy," she said coldly. He smiled again and whispered, "Or maybe you are at mine." The words spread like fire through the hall. Soldiers looked at each other, shocked by the arrogance. The commander's jaw tightened. Her hand almost moved to strike him again, but something stopped her. For the first time, she hesitated. His calm, his strange confidence, it felt dangerous, not because of his strength, but because of the unknown hidden behind his smile. The silence was heavy. Only the sound of his breathing filled the room. The aliens waited for her to punish him, to crush this insolence, but instead she asked, "What trick are you hiding, human?" He lowered his head slightly, as if thinking. Then he looked back up. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried through the entire hall. "You will see soon." Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know why, but those words made her uneasy. The air around them seemed heavier, as if something invisible was waiting to happen. The commander forced herself to laugh, strong and mocking. "You? A chained man with nothing? You will show us something?" Her soldiers laughed with her, but their voices were not as strong as before. The human only closed his eyes. He was calm, too calm. The commander studied him once more, and for the first time, she felt a chill run down her spine. The encounter was supposed to be simple, a prisoner humiliated, a human broken, but instead, in a single moment, she found herself unsettled, caught in a game she had not chosen. The human had no weapon, no strength, no army, yet his smile, his words, and his silence planted a question in her mind that she could not ignore. She turned away, giving orders to her soldiers to take him back to the holding cell. Her face was unreadable, but inside, her thoughts were racing. Who was this man? Why did he not fear? What was the trick he promised to show? As the doors closed behind him, the hall was filled with whispers. The soldiers mocked him less loudly now. They felt something too, something strange, and deep inside, the commander knew the truth. She had struck him to remind him of his place. But in that moment, it was her heart that trembled. The cell was dark, lit only by a faint glow from the alien chains around his wrists. The human sat on the cold ground, his back against the wall, his head bowed. The guards outside whispered to each other, mocking him, confident that the human was powerless. But inside his mind, he was calm. His breathing was slow and steady. His eyes were closed, as if he was already planning something. He remembered the way the commander's eyes had flickered with hesitation. That was the moment he had been waiting for. A seed of doubt was planted. And seeds always grow. Hours passed. Then the heavy sound of armored boots echoed in the hallway. The door opened, and the commander herself stepped into the cell. She dismissed the guards with a wave of her hand, leaving only the two of them inside. She stood tall, her shadow falling across him. "You spoke boldly," she said, her voice sharp but curious. "Now prove it." The man lifted his head slowly. His lips curved into the same quiet smile. "So you are ready for a challenge," he said. Her eyes narrowed. "Do not mistake this for kindness. Human, I want to see your last breath. I want to see if your words mean anything before I crush them." He tilted his head, studying her face. "Then give me the chance," he replied softly. "But I will need tools, even scraps, and I will show you something your kind has never seen." She laughed, her voice echoing in the stone chamber. "You are chained, broken, and alone, and yet you demand tools. Do you believe you can trick me so easily?" The human's voice remained calm, almost too calm. "Not a trick, a truth. You think humans are weak, but we build from nothing. Give me what you think is useless, and I will make it powerful." Her curiosity grew, though she did not want to admit it. She hated the way his words stirred something inside her chest. It was not fear, but it was close. Finally, she gave the order. The guards dragged in broken parts, scraps of alien metal, shattered energy cells, and wires. They tossed them onto the ground in front of him, laughing. "They're human. Play with garbage," one sneered. The commander crossed her arms. "Show me your magic or die." The man's smile deepened. He reached out slowly, touching the scraps with his chained hands. His fingers moved with care, as if he already knew what each piece could become. The aliens watched with amusement, but their smiles began to fade when sparks flickered under his touch. Piece by piece, he worked, bending, twisting, and connecting wires. His hands moved quickly, guided by memory and instinct. The scraps began to take form. His breathing remained calm, steady. As if this task was nothing new, the commander leaned closer, her eyes fixed on his movements. She had expected foolishness, but what she saw was focus, brilliance, something alive in his touch. Minutes passed, and then with a sudden flash of light, the pieces clicked together. A small device pulsed with blue energy in his hand. The guards stepped back in shock, whispering in disbelief. The commander's eyes widened. She had not expected this. "What is that?" she demanded. The human lifted the device, the glow reflecting in his eyes. "This," he said quietly, "is the beginning." He pressed a part of the device, and suddenly the chains on his wrists flickered. The glowing bonds sparked and weakened. The guards gasped, reaching for their weapons, but the commander raised her hand to stop them. The human did not run, did not attack. Instead, he let the device hum softly. "You see?" he said, his voice calm. "This is what it means to be human, to make something from nothing, to turn weakness into power." For a moment, silence filled the cell. The commander's heart raced. She hated it, but she was impressed. This was not brute strength. This was something different, something dangerous. Finally she spoke, her voice low. "You will fight. You will face my warriors in the arena if you survive. Then perhaps your words carry meaning." The human smiled. "Then give me the challenge." The guards looked at each other nervously. Their laughter was gone. Their eyes carried unease. Even though he was only one man, only human, there was something about him that unsettled them all. The commander turned sharply and walked out, her cloak swirling behind her. Her soldiers followed. The human was left alone again, but this time he was not a prisoner in their eyes. He was a threat. As the door closed, the human leaned back against the wall. The device still glowing faintly in his hand, he whispered to himself, "This is only the first step." And somewhere in the fortress, the commander pressed her hand against her chest, confused and angry at the strange tremor she had felt when she saw him smile. She told herself it was only curiosity, nothing more, but deep inside, she knew it was something else, something she could not control. The arena was alive with noise. Thousands of alien voices echoed from the stands, their eyes fixed on the circle of stone at the center. Torches burned with blue fire, filling the air with smoke and heat. The ground was scarred with marks of old battles, stained by those who had fallen before. At the center of the arena stood the human. His hands still bore the faint burn marks from the chains, but his eyes were calm, steady. He carried nothing but the small device he had built from scraps. The aliens laughed when they saw it, calling it a toy, calling it worthless. Above him, on a raised platform, the commander sat on her throne, her gaze sharp and unblinking. She told herself this was only a test, just a way to expose his weakness. Yet her heart beat faster than she wanted to admit. The gates opened with a metallic roar. From the shadows emerged one of her strongest warriors. He was massive, his body covered in thick armor, his weapon a glowing spear that crackled with energy. The crowd cheered. Confident the human would not survive a single strike, the warrior stepped forward, his footsteps heavy on the stone. He pointed the spear at the human and growled, "This ends quickly." But the human only smiled. His voice carried through the silence, "Quickly for who?" The fight began. The alien charged, his spear aimed at the human's chest. The crowd roared in anticipation of blood. But at the last second, the human moved, fast and precise. He twisted aside, letting the spear strike the ground. Sparks exploded, dust rising into the air. The human lifted his small device, pressing a hidden switch. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light burst from it. The warrior staggered, his vision stolen. The crowd gasped, not understanding what had happened to them. It looked like magic. The human moved again, quicker than they expected. He grabbed a shard of broken stone from the arena floor and pressed it against the warrior's armor. The device hummed, sending a wave of energy through the shard. The alien roared in pain as the armor cracked. The commander leaned forward in her seat, her eyes wide. She could not believe what she was seeing. From scraps, from nothing, he had created a weapon that could turn their own strength against them. The warrior swung blindly, rage filling his movements, but the human was faster. He ducked, dodged, and struck at the weak points of the armor. Each strike was small, but each one counted, piece by piece. The great warrior began to falter. The crowd, once laughing, now grew silent. Some whispered in disbelief, others shouted in anger, but none could deny what they were seeing. A human, fragile, weak, unarmed, was holding his ground against one of their finest. The commander's chest tightened. Her fingers gripped the arm of her throne. She had wanted to humiliate him, to prove his arrogance false. Instead, she was witnessing something impossible. Finally, with a final move, the human pressed his device against the spear itself. The weapon sparked violently, then shattered into useless fragments. The warrior fell to his knees, defeated. The arena was silent. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the warrior and the calm steps of the human as he stood tall, his chains broken, his body wounded, but his spirit unshaken. The human looked up at the commander. His voice rang clear. "You see now, strength is not in power. Strength is in the will to survive, in the mind that adapts, in the heart that refuses to break." Her breath caught in her throat. The soldiers around her shifted uncomfortably. No one dared to speak. The human had turned scraps into victory. He had turned weakness into triumph. The commander rose from her throne. Her eyes locked on him. For the first time, she felt her knees weaken, not from fear of defeat, but from something deeper. Something she did not want to name. The human lowered his device, his expression calm, almost gentle. He whispered, just loud enough for her to hear across the arena. This is only the beginning. And in that moment, she realized the truth. He was not here to survive. He was here to change everything. Asterisk. The arena was silent. The dust had settled, and the defeated warrior lay groaning on the ground. All eyes turned to the human who still stood in the circle. His chest rose and fell with calm breaths. Not with the fear or panic the aliens had expected. The commander remained on her throne, but inside she felt the weight of something she had never experienced. This was not just defiance, not just survival, it was power, and it had come from a man who should have been broken. The crowd finally found its voice. Some shouted in anger, demanding the human's death. Others whispered in awe, unable to believe what they had witnessed. The commander raised her hand, and the arena fell silent again. Every soldier and every voice waited for her command. She rose to her feet, her cloak flowing behind her as she stepped to the edge of her platform. Her eyes locked on the human, searching him, measuring him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them felt heavier than steel. Finally she called out, "You have shown us a trick, but tricks do not make you strong." Her voice was loud and steady, though her heart beat faster than she wanted to admit. Strength is not in words or toys, it is in conquest, in domination. The human tilted his head, his small smile returning. "If conquest is all you understand, then you are weaker than you believe," he said calmly. His words carried through the arena like fire. His voice was not loud, but it reached everyone. Gasps and murmurs filled the crowd. The arrogance of such a statement was unthinkable. A human chained and wounded, calling their commander weak. Yet none could deny the strange chill that ran through them as he spoke. The commander's jaw tightened, anger flared in her chest. But something else was there too, respect. She did not want to feel it, but she could not stop it. His defiance was not foolish pride. It was controlled, measured, dangerous. She descended from the platform. Soldiers followed her, but with a sharp gesture she ordered them to stay back. The commander entered the arena herself, the crowd gasping in shock. Never before had she stepped onto the circle for a mere prisoner. She walked slowly, her armor glinting under the firelight, her boots striking the stone floor with power. The human did not move away. He only stood taller, his eyes never leaving hers when she stopped before him, only a breath away. She studied him closely. His face was bruised, his body weakened, yet his eyes burned with something unbreakable. "You speak as if you are more than a man," she said, her voice low but sharp. "What are you really?" He smiled again, and for a moment, it unsettled her more than any weapon. "I am human," he answered. "That is enough." Her throat tightened. The words were simple, but they carried a weight she could not explain. She had fought countless enemies, conquered countless worlds, yet none had made her feel this way, not with strength, but with certainty. The soldiers around the arena shifted. They were waiting for her to strike him down, to prove her dominance, but she hesitated. Her hand twitched at the hilt of her blade, yet she did not draw it. Instead she asked, "Why do you not beg for mercy? Why do you not fear me?" The human's voice was steady. "Because fear gives you power, and I will not give you that." Her heart skipped. His words cut deeper than she expected. She had ruled through fear all her life. Yet here he was, breaking that rule with nothing but resolve. The crowd began to murmur again, sensing the strange shift in the air. The power that once belonged only to the commander now felt divided, shared between her and the man who should have been nothing. Finally, she stepped back, her eyes still locked on him. She raised her voice so all could hear. "You will face more trials, human. If you survive them all, then perhaps you are more than prey." The human bowed his head slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. "Then I will survive," he said simply. The commander turned sharply, her cloak sweeping behind her as she left the arena. Her soldiers hurried after her, their faces confused, unsure of what had just happened. As the gates closed, the human stood alone in the arena, his body weak but his spirit unshaken. He whispered under his breath, "The shift has already begun." And high above, the commander felt her knees weaken. As she walked, her mind was full of thoughts she could not control. For the first time in her life, she was no longer certain who truly held the power. The fortress shook with voices the next day. Word of the human survival spread like fire through the alien city. Soldiers whispered of his defiance, servants repeated his words in secret, and even children played games pretending to be man who had faced the commander without fear. The commander heard every whisper. Her people were restless, divided between mocking the human and fearing him. She could not allow such doubt to grow, not among her warriors, and yet she herself could not shake the image of his eyes, steady and unbroken. She summoned her council. Their faces were stern, voices sharp. "Commander," one of the elders said, "this human is a danger. His tricks are poison. He must be ended before his words spread further." Another nodded. "The people question your strength," they saw. Hesitation in the arena. "You must crush him before the doubt grows." The commander's jaw tightened. Their words struck true. But something inside her rebelled against the idea. To kill him now felt wrong. It would prove nothing. She needed more. She needed to see if his courage could survive what was to come. Prepare the arena again, she ordered. Her council bowed. Though some looked uneasy, she turned away before they could read the storm in her eyes. That evening, the arena blazed with torches once more. The crowd packed the stone seats, their voices a thunder that shook the night sky. At the center, the human stood again. His body bore the marks of battle, yet his spirit seemed untouched. He carried no weapon, only his calm. The gates rumbled open, and this time, two warriors entered, not one. They were both giants, their bodies covered in heavy armor. One carried a chain blade that hissed with sparks. The other held a shield so large it could block the sky. The crowd cheered, convinced the human's end had finally come. No tricks, no scraps could save him now. From above, the commander watched. Her expression was hard, but her heart betrayed her, beating faster with every step the warriors took. She told herself this was only a test, only a show of strength. But deep inside she wanted to see if he could rise again. The warriors closed in, circling him like predators. The human stood still, his eyes calm, watching, waiting. He did not rush, did not panic. Instead he studied every movement, every gap in their armor. The first warrior struck, his chain blade cutting through the air with a howl. The human dropped to the ground, rolling away as sparks exploded across the stone. Before he could rise, the second warrior's shield slammed down like thunder. The ground cracked beneath the force. The crowd roared with excitement, certain the human was finished. But when the dust cleared, he was already moving, sliding between their legs, quick as shadow. His hand pressed against a weak joint in the shield. With sudden precision, he twisted a piece of loose armor and pulled. The shield's locking mechanism snapped. The giant stumbled back, struggling to hold his weapon steady. The crowd gasped. The second warrior swung his chain blade again. But this time the human was ready. He used the broken piece of metal in his hand to hook the chain, forcing it to twist around the blade itself. Sparks burst into the air, and the weapon jammed. The crowd shouted in disbelief. The warriors, enraged, struck harder, faster. But the human did not fight them with strength. He fought them with patience, with timing, with cunning. Every move was small, every strike precise. He was breaking them piece by piece. The commander rose from her throne, her eyes wide despite herself. She could feel it, the power shifting again. The crowd no longer laughed. They no longer cheered for her warriors. They watched in silence, held by the sight of one man refusing to fall. Finally, with one last strike, The human pushed the broken chain into the shield's crack. Energy from the two weapons collided, releasing a violent burst of light. Both warriors fell to the ground, stunned, their weapons useless. When the light faded, the human stood alone once more. His chest heaved with breath, sweat dripping down. His face, but his eyes never wavered. The arena was silent, no laughter, no cheers. Only silence. Then slowly, the human raised his voice. "Strength is not in size, not in weapons, not in fear," he said. "Strength is in knowing where to stand when the world tells you to fall." The words echoed across the stone. The silence grew heavier. The commander's heart pounded. She had wanted proof of weakness, but instead she saw a truth she could not deny. Her knees felt unsteady as she stepped back, her hands clenched. She could not show it, not here, not before her people, but she knew something had changed forever. Asterisk. The night after the battle was restless. The fortress that had always stood in silence now buzzed with whispers. The human's name carried through the halls. From the lowliest servant to the highest soldier. Some spoke of him with fear, others with admiration, but none could ignore him anymore. The commander walked through the corridors, her cloak trailing behind her. Her thoughts were heavy. She had seen her best warriors fall, not by brute force, but by a man who should have been nothing. She tried to push away the memory of his words, but they echoed in her mind when she entered her private chamber. She dismissed her guards. She stood alone by the window, staring at the alien moons glowing over the horizon. Her hand rested on the hilt of her blade, yet she felt no victory in her heart. Instead, she felt a storm. She thought of the human's eyes, steady and unshaken. She thought of how he stood, tall even when his body was broken, and most of all, she thought of how her own knees had weakened in the arena. She clenched her fist, whispering to herself, "Why?" Meanwhile, in the dark cell below, the human sat quietly. His body was bruised, his breathing rough, but his spirit was calm. He replayed the battles in his mind, not with pride, but with purpose. He knew he had gained something more dangerous than survival. He had gained their attention. The next morning, she summoned him again. The guards brought him to the great hall, but this time the air was different. The laughter and mockery that had filled the space before were gone now. The soldiers watched him with silence, some with suspicion, some with respect. The commander stepped forward, her eyes fixed on him. For a long moment she said nothing. She only studied him, as if trying to read the truth behind his calm face. Finally she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "You are still alive, against all odds." The human raised his head, his smile faint, because being human means finding life in the middle of death. He replied. Her chest tightened. She hated how his words always struck deeper than any blade. She turned away, walking a slow circle around him. "You should not exist in my world," she said, "and yet you stand here, stronger with every trial." The human's voice carried through the hall. "I am not stronger because of what I hold. I am stronger because I will not bow." A murmur ran through the soldiers. Some nodded without realizing. The commander's jaw clenched. She could feel it again. That shift, that dangerous spark he carried, it was spreading. And she could not stop it. She stopped before him, her eyes sharp. But there was something else in them now. Not only anger, not only challenge, but something far more dangerous: respect. "You fight with no weapons, no armor, no army," she said. "And yet my people begin to see you as something more. Why?" The human's gaze did not falter. "Because humans do not fight for power. We fight for survival, and survival makes us unstoppable." Her breath caught in her throat. She turned her face away so no one would see the flicker in her eyes. For the first time in her life, someone had spoken to her not as a commander, not as a conqueror, but as an equal. The silence grew heavy in the hall. The soldiers shifted uneasily. They felt the tension between them, a tension that was no longer built on hate alone. The commander raised her voice, breaking the silence. "Enough. You will face one final trial. "And if you survive, I will decide your fate with my own hand." The human smiled, a calm and steady smile. "Then I will be ready," he said. She turned sharply and left the hall, but her steps were not as strong as before. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her mind raced with questions she did not want to face. Alone in her chamber once more, she pressed her hand to her chest. Her body trembled with something she had never known. She whispered to herself, "Why do I feel this way?" And deep below, in the silence of his cell, the human closed his eyes. He knew what was happening. He had seen it in her eyes. He had seen it in the way her voice wavered. Respect, dangerous and unspoken, was beginning to grow. The fortress stood silent on the night of the final trial. The alien city outside still roared with life, but inside the walls, tension was heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Torches burned low, their flames trembling as if they too felt the weight of what was coming. The human sat alone in his cell. His body carried bruises from every battle, yet his eyes remained steady. His hands rested on his knees, calm and unmoving. He was not waiting for death. He was waiting for the truth. He had always known to reveal itself. Above him, the commander stood on her balcony, staring down at the arena. Her soldiers gathered, restless, whispering among themselves. Some wanted blood, others wanted proof. All waited for her command, but she herself felt no clarity, only a fire in her chest that would not fade. At last the horn sounded, the gates opened, and the human stepped into the arena once more. His feet dragged slightly from exhaustion, but his back was straight. His face lifted toward the crowd without fear. The commander entered as well, but not as before. She did not sit upon her throne. She stepped down into the circle of stone, her sword at her side. Her warriors gasped, stunned. For the first time in years, their leader herself would fight. She faced the human, her expression sharp, but her heart unsteady. "This ends tonight," she said, her voice echoing across the arena. "Show me the truth you claim to carry." The human's faint smile returned. "I do not need to show." "You," he said calmly, "you have already seen it." Her breath caught for just a moment, but she masked it with anger. She drew her blade, the metal shining under the firelight. The crowd cheered, their voices shaking the walls. The duel began. She struck first, her sword cutting the air with power. The human dodged, his movements slower than before, but precise. Each time she attacked, he slipped away by the smallest margin. His body may have been weak, but his resolve turned weakness into strength. The fight raged, sparks flying. The commander's strength was undeniable, her strikes fierce and merciless. Yet with every clash, she felt her chest tighten. For every time she should have struck him down. He rose again. His eyes never left hers, steady, unyielding. The crowd grew silent, watching not a slaughter, but something else. They saw balance in the circle, not dominance, not prey and predator, but two forces colliding as equals. Finally, with a swift move, the commander disarmed him. Her blade pressed against his throat. The crowd erupted, certain it was over. Her soldiers shouted her name, demanding the kill. But then it happened. She looked into his eyes, and her hands trembled. Her knees weakened, not from the weight of battle, but from the truth staring back at her. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the silence. "You see, it was never about power. It was about choice. I chose to stand. I chose not to fear. And now you must choose too." Her chest rose and fell. Her sword shook. The crowd waited, hungry for her command. But in her heart, the realization struck with the force of lightning. She was not the one in control anymore. The human, weak and broken, had taken her strength and turned it against her, not by blade, not by trick, but by will, and that will shook her more than any weapon ever could. Slowly, she lowered her sword. The gasps from the crowd filled the arena. No one could believe what they saw. Their commander, undefeated for years, had lowered her weapon before. A human, she stepped back, her eyes still locked on him. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "What are you?" The human's smile was gentle, yet unbreakable. "I told you," he said. "I am human, and that is enough." Her knees weakened again, her breath caught, and for the first time in her life, she felt herself surrender not to an enemy, but to a truth. The arena fell into silence. The crowd could not comprehend what had happened, but they felt it, a shift, a change, a new force rising among them. The commander turned sharply, hiding the tremor in her body as she walked away. But no matter how hard she tried, she could not silence the truth that echoed in her chest. The human remained in the arena, standing tall, battered but unbroken. He whispered softly to himself, "The future begins now." And somewhere deep inside her heart, the commander knew he was right.